My name is Mustafa Al-Bassam. I was in the hacktivist collective Anonymous, and I carried out cyber attacks against the US and Egyptian governments. And this is everything I'm authorized to tell you. There was like a report released a few years ago that suggested like 1 in 4 hackers are actually law enforcement informers. So it's very difficult to know who you can trust as a hacker, especially if you're doing it anonymously. There was always an element of suspicion. At one point, there was someone in the group who was leaking information to the press, and we didn't know who that was. So I knew I could be arrested, for example, but I was willing to take that risk because I thought what I was doing was right. I started being involved with Anonymous around 2010. I was around 15 years old at the time. My code name was T-Flow. It's just short for time flow, so it's just like a random name. Anonymous has existed since around 2006, and throughout the years, different groups of people have taken that name and done different things around that name. And it's not even necessarily a single collective of people, but multiple collectives of people throughout the years. Anonymous doesn't really recruit members. It's more like members come to Anonymous because they hear about Anonymous online. We had these chat rooms and anyone could join them. And in some way that's a bad thing because like there's also probably a lot of law enforcement officers on those chat rooms. But there was also like different levels of chat rooms. Like we had public chat rooms and then we also had private chat rooms that had less people in it, that we did more of the sensitive hacking operations. So in some way, Anonymous consisted of many cells of different groups that were doing some activities privately and some activities publicly. Before I was in Anonymous, I was part of these other chat rooms of people that were trying to protest against online censorship. There was like various people in these chat rooms that would say, well, like these protests don't have that much impact, like petitions, they didn't do anything. So why don't we actually try to attack corporations that are engaging in censorship by taking them down? And that kind of like divided the group because it was obviously illegal to conduct denial of service attacks against organizations. But I was kind of on the side of like, well, it's legal, but it's ethical. So then those people kind of moved into a different chat room and then started calling themselves Anonymous. And that's basically how Operation Payback effectively started. Operation Payback was an operation that was conducted by Anonymous in late 2010. The reason why it started is because there was a lot of concern that certain corporations were trying to control the internet. There's this website called the Pirate Bay where you can illegally download movies and other kind of content. But there were corporations like the Motion Picture Association of America and the Recording Industry Association of America that were trying to take down these piracy websites. And we kind of thought that wasn't right because the internet should be a free place to use and for people to be able to share whatever they want. So as part of that, Anonymous conducted this operation to try to take down the websites of the Motion Picture Association of America and the RIAA. And the way it would work is that if you wanted to contribute to this attack, you would install a piece of software on your computer that was called the Low Orbit Ion Cannon, and it would turn your computer into part of a network that would contribute to an attack against this website, where it would basically flood the website with traffic and overload it with so much traffic that it would shut down or would stop responding. Back in the day, in the 50s, for example, people would protest by like sitting in at restaurants so that it's kind of like preventing people from going to restaurants. So this is kind of like a digital version of that, basically. At the time, I was trying to organize the chat rooms to say, hey, here's the target at that time. The biggest target that we had was MasterCard and Visa. WikiLeaks has just released a bunch of like leaks from the US government showing war logs from Iraq. So they were accepting donations, and one of the ways you could donate to WikiLeaks was through PayPal or MasterCard and Visa. But then MasterCard and Visa and PayPal banned WikiLeaks from using their services, and a lot of people thought that wasn't right. At some point, we had 7,000 people who joined the chat room to volunteer to turn their computer into something that could be used as part of an attack to take down MasterCard and Visa. And at some point, I think MasterCard was taken down, and then people couldn't transact with MasterCard, and PayPal was also overloaded with so much traffic that PayPal also went down. So after Operation Payback, I kind of realized that these attacks, which were called denial of service attacks, they didn't really achieve that much. I thought, well, why don't we actually try to hack into these organizations to see what they're doing and to leak their emails? My role evolved because I wanted to do more sophisticated hacks. I found like I was observing who are the most kind of technically minded people in the group, and then I put them into a chat room where we could try to experiment with hacking into different organizations and companies. I got a buzz out of it. I mean, I was 15 and 16 at the time, so to me it was just fun. It was like it was also kind of like my community. I would just spend a lot of time online in these hacker communities trying to hack stuff. The process of trying to hack a company is kind of like trying to solve a challenge or a puzzle, because there's many different ways you can try to approach it, and it's always satisfying when you find a way in. It's not that funny if you hack into a hospital, because we actually did find a vulnerability in an NHS website, for example, but we didn't exploit it. We just emailed the NHS to say, hey, you have this vulnerability, you should fix it. But if you hack into like major corporations like Sony, for example, or Fox, and leak that, then I think that's a lot more entertaining, not just for the hacker, but also for the public, because people don't have a lot of sympathy for major corporations like Sony, for example. Sony was a very classic hacker target because Sony did a lot of things to piss off hackers. They prosecuted this guy called George Hotz for managing to jailbreak PlayStation 3, for example. And then they had this scandal where they had this rootkit on the music CDs to try to prevent you from copying the music. So Sony was a classic hacker target, and they had such a big attack surface because they had so many websites and so many different divisions. So we hacked Sony about 6 or 7 different times, and Sony was hacked 21 times in the summer of 2011. One organization we hacked was this organization called the Westboro Baptist Church. And the Westboro Baptist Church is very well known in the US as this hate group that would, for example, go to the funerals of dead soldiers and protests. And the Westboro Baptist Church conducted this press release where they called Anonymous a bunch of crybabies. So they were kind of trying to poke the nest to try to say, hey, you can't hack us. And we actually did hack them, and we defaced their website on a live radio show. And that was kind of like one of the more fun hacks that we did that was kind of like good from a public perception perspective. But there was also hacks that were not so great from a public perception perspective. So for example, I think at some point Sony did a denial of service attack against the PlayStation network, and that pissed off a lot of gamers because they couldn't play their games, and that made them not like Anonymous. When it comes to the big companies like Google or Facebook or Twitter, their systems tend to be a lot more secure because they have a lot of resources to spend on cybersecurity. Like Google has one of their best cybersecurity teams. So I don't think their servers are that easy to hack or that easy to target, other than trying to conduct phishing attacks on people. Like you can probably try to steal people's usernames and passwords by tricking them with a phishing attack. But I think it's more of like the smaller companies nowadays, or the medium-sized companies, that are more vulnerable to attacks on the service because they just don't have a lot of resources to spend on making the system secure. In terms of the ethics of the attacks, I think if it's an isolated attack, like you're hacking into a specific company's emails, I think that's way more ethical than some of the other attacks where, for example, we hacked into certain usernames and password databases. And for those types of attacks, there's a lot of collateral damage because there's a lot of innocent people in those usernames and passwords databases. I wouldn't necessarily say I regret it, but I wouldn't want to do it again. Like it's something that happened in the past. That was a very interesting time in the internet. It made people a lot more serious and conscious about security. And also basically just exposed that the emperor had no clothes, and someone had to do that. And if it wasn't Laltec, it would have been someone else. Like those vulnerabilities existed, and if we didn't exploit them, someone more nefarious would have exploited them. That would try to have used these vulnerabilities for nefarious means. After the PayPal attack and the MasterCard attack, people were looking for new targets. And around early 2011, the Arab Spring happened. And this was when a lot of people in Arab countries like Egypt and Tunisia and Syria started protesting against their governments. And Anonymous tried to take part of that in various ways. We hacked into the website of the Tunisian Prime Minister, for example, and leaked various emails. Or we would try to give them information of how to circumvent government censorship so they could access the internet. I think Twitter played a big role during the Arab Spring and during various protests. So it's like if you were trying to take part in some political activity, then you would go on Twitter and try to organize that on Twitter. A lot of the protests there and actions that happened there were organized on Facebook groups. I was in touch with this guy in Tunisia who was concerned that the government was trying to hack into like the Facebook accounts of the protesters. And he gave me access to his computer to see what was going on. And I found out that if you use the internet in Tunisia, then if you go on Facebook, when you type in your username and password, it will automatically send your username and password to Tunisian government servers. And so to prevent that, we tried to create a browser extension to chip out that malware so that people could log into Facebook or Gmail without that happening, without their usernames and passwords going to the government. I think Edward Snowden revealed like a very significant fact that people suspected was true, which was the idea that governments were surveilling pretty much everyone's internet traffic. And back then in 2011, the crazy thing is that by default, most websites were not using HTTPS. So like if you go on Facebook or Gmail, back then, if you type in your username and password, it's sent unencrypted by default. And after Snowden, that changed very rapidly and everything became HTTPS by default. So like encryption became much more commonplace. So the CIA attack was one of the more popular attacks we did that generated a lot of media attention because it was very embarrassing to the US government that some small hacker group could take down the CIA website. That was in 2011. And the process was this guy in our group that had a very large botnet. And a botnet is basically a network of infected computers. So if you download malware on your computer, like you go online and you accidentally download like a malicious program or malicious file, or you open a malicious attachment, then that might make your computer a member of this network of infected computers. And then what you could do is you could basically get those computers to do anything you wanted, and to send a lot of traffic to one specific website to try to take it down. And that's what happened in the case of the CIA's website. In terms of the US Treasury being hacked or any kind of government organization being hacked, it doesn't completely surprise me, because just a few years ago, a majority of US government systems were still on Windows XP, and they had to pay Microsoft like millions of dollars to maintain it. It doesn't surprise me that the US Treasury might have been hacked from China, because I think since at least 2010, the Chinese government has been building up quite a significant hacking capacity. But it's not just the Chinese government. It's also Western governments do that as well. Western governments like the US and the UK, they've generally had a hard time kind of keeping up with cybersecurity. I think it's somewhat improving, but at the end of the day, it's a cat and mouse game, because there's so many different ways you can get in and so many different attack vectors. The surface is so huge that I think these attacks will always happen in the future. And I think like when the most serious one recently was when the NHS was hacked in the UK with the ransomware, and then a lot of NHS hospitals had to shut down because they were hacked. And the reason why they were hacked is because they were still using Windows XP. The name Anonymous originated on this image board called 4chan. And if you would post anonymously, then it would say this post was by Anonymous. People thought, well, it might be funny. What if all of these posts by Anonymous was actually by one person called Anonymous? And then people eventually started doing activities under the name Anonymous. And it started out with these kind of like innocent raids, what they would call. So for example, there was this online video game called Habbo Hotel where they would block the pool, for example, and say, well, this pool is closed due to AIDS. And they would say Anonymous did this raid. Or they would like raid like talk show hosts, or send people like pizzas, for example, kind of like innocent things like that. And then eventually it became more political and had more of an activist purpose in around 2007, when there was these operations against the Church of Scientology, this controversial kind of like religious group that were trying to shut down content on the internet that criticized them. And they did actual like real life protests. And that's where the Guy Fawkes mask came from in the movie V for Vendetta, which I thought was kind of cool. But I wasn't interested in doing the physical protest. Instead, I was a lot more focused around hacking and kind of these digital actions. So even though if there was bad press, we wouldn't attack the press. We would just kind of like make fun of it. And there was a lot of like funny press against Anonymous. There was like these articles that called Anonymous the internet hate machine, for example. I didn't know anyone's real identity in the group. There were some people that were public about identity, but that was very frowned upon in the group, because the whole point of Anonymous was to be anonymous. Because if you're trying to use your real identity there, then it's kind of like you're trying to take credit for everyone's work under your real identity. Because if you use your real identity, then it's like you're the natural target for the press to come to say, okay, this person with this real name was part of this group. So it's like you're kind of like trying to take credit for other people's work. There isn't really like a concrete rule book. There's this kind of like a funny rule book, like the rules of the internet, but that's not like a serious rule book. It's like this 41-page rule book. It's more like a humorous rule book. I wouldn't say there was a policing system if someone broke the rules necessarily, but it's more like that person wouldn't be trusted as much, or you might not talk to them as much, but they wouldn't necessarily be kicked off. Like you would only be banned from the chat room, for example, because ultimately, because the group believed in free speech, it was pretty much like anything goes. There was definitely a lot of like, in some cases, internal drama between members. I think at some point, like one of the admins in the server actually leaked all of the IP addresses of all the users on the server, for example, because they had some feud with someone on the server. Sometimes the hackers would try to hack each other because of like disputes or feuds. That person was kicked off the server, but it was very bad because all the IP addresses were leaked, and that helped law enforcement. So there's no fixed hierarchy in the group. There's no leaders. There's no kind of owners or anything like that. It's a very fluid hierarchy in the sense that who has the most influence is the person who gets the most stuff done. But it's very meritocratic in the sense that anyone could come and join and participate and create their own operations. And a lot of people anonymous contribute in lots of different ways. So obviously you have hackers with the technical knowledge. There are people who are good at graphics, for example, who would create graphics for these operations or press releases for these operations to inspire people to join these operations. People who are translators trying to translate stuff from English. But I would say, unfortunately, the vast majority of the people in these chat rooms were people trying to participate in denial of service attacks against websites, because that's the easiest way you can participate. But that's also very risky because you're doing these denial of service attacks with your real IP address on your real computer, and that leaves you at risk of kind of being arrested. Lulsec was a hacking group that I created while I was part of Anonymous. I wanted Anonymous to be kind of like a vigilante group, to do things that were ethical or to do things that had activist purpose, like exposing wrongdoing or taking down corporations that were doing bad things. But there wasn't any specific reason to leak the X Factor contestants database. And people were kind of coming up with more and more of these kind of hacks of like random organizations or databases. So I thought that's not what I want Anonymous brand to be used for. So I said, okay, why don't we just create this different group called Lulsec? And so we released the X Factor database under the name of Lulsec. And then eventually Lulsec became quite big at the time and had hundreds of thousands of Twitter followers. Lulsec was consisted of about 6 members that were also part of Anonymous. The word Lulsec comes from the corruption of the word LOL, so it's just like LOL security. And so the slogan is like, we would do it for the lulz, or we would do it for the LOL. So rather than having some kind of ethical or activist purpose, it's just doing it for fun. And the word security is because a lot of security companies would be like X security or Y security. So we thought it'd be funny to call the hacking group lulz security. So the main tool used for communication was this chat protocol called Internet Relay Chat, which was like this old chat protocol that existed before the web that people used in the 80s and 90s. And it's kind of like a very old school text-based chat system that's used by mostly like technical people like programmers. The funny thing is, I don't know where my members were located physically. I could probably guess based on the time zone, but they weren't necessarily working on consistent time zones. Like a lot of people were talking, we would talk at 2 a.m. in the morning, for example. I would stay out late up at night. But I would say a lot of people, after they were arrested, it turned out a lot of people were in the US and Europe, in the UK. Like by coincidence, it turned out that I think 4 out of 6 of the people in our group were actually based in the UK, which was like a complete coincidence. It's not like we were looking for UK people specifically. Anonymous was really not financially motivated. We didn't really have any cost. It's kind of like a David versus Goliath kind of thing, because it's like someone with $100 laptop could hack a major corporation that's worth multiple billions of dollars. And that's very interesting from a power perspective. It allows you to kind of subvert the power difference between the individual and the corporation. We had a donation page where you could donate Bitcoin to Lulsec, and various anonymous websites also you could donate to Anonymous as well. And this was back in the very early days when no one really knew about Bitcoin in 2011. Like someone donated quite a lot of Bitcoin. We actually ended up using it for anything because we didn't really have any costs. Honestly, I don't know where it ended up going. It was like $400 back then, so it probably got wasted on like random things. All the people that I interacted with in Lulsec and Anonymous, I don't think most of them had day jobs, but they were also quite young. As I said, like I was in school. I knew 1 or 2 people that had day jobs, but they weren't as active as much because obviously they didn't have as much time. It's hard to say what is the most amount of money someone maybe with hacking. But I think the biggest hacks I've heard of with the most amount of money involved is people hacking Bitcoin exchanges. The value of Bitcoin went up quite a lot. After certain people were arrested, people started campaigns to raise funds for the legal defense of those people. And they had to do like a crowdfunding campaign to pay for the legal fees. But I think that was in the US. In the UK, that wasn't really necessary when we were arrested because you get like free legal defense in the UK. And there's no such thing as like damages in the UK in a criminal case. So it's not like we have to repay restitution to any companies. I was arrested in the summer of 2011 when I was 16. I think this was in July. I think it was a few weeks after I finished my GCSE exams. I just had a knock on the door, and it was these plainclothes police officers that worked for the computer crimes unit at the Metropolitan Police. When I had a knock on the door, I suspected they might be the police, so I turned off my computer. And then they came to the room, they searched the entire room for a few hours, kind of confiscated all the computers, devices, USB sticks, anything electronic. And then I was taken to the police station and I was given a free lawyer using legal aid. And I was basically advised to give a no comment interview. In the interview, I basically would answer no comment to every question. They could only hold you in custody for 24 hours. And so after 24 hours, I was released on bail. And one of my bail conditions was that I was not supposed to use the internet. When I was arrested and my identity was revealed, I think everyone was surprised that I was 16 because for some reason everyone thought I was 30 years old because I was doing all this hacking and stuff and I was online quite a lot. I had a serious crime prevention order placed on me for 5 years. As part of that, I had to email the police every time I bought a new laptop, for example, or a new computer, or I disposed of a computer. And one of the conditions, for example, was that I'm not allowed to delete my browsing history, but it didn't say I'm not allowed to use private browsing mode, for example. So it's not very consistent. So it's not that being a member of Anonymous itself is a crime, because like Anonymous is not some designated terrorist group or something like that. But what is a crime is participating in hacking attacks or doing hacking attacks. That's illegal under the Computer Misuse Act of 1990. I think to some extent, cybercrime should be treated the same as other crimes, but I think it's important to realize that there's also the other side of it, which is companies have a responsibility to make sure the systems are secure. So there should also be penalties for companies that don't invest enough in security. I left the group a few weeks before I was arrested because it was the heat was starting to get too much. But I didn't come back to the group after I was arrested. When I decided to leave, it was because of several reasons. At that point, we had so much attention on us. Like we were so popular among the hacker community, but also the public. And there were so many people trying to come after us. Like not just law enforcement, but also hacker groups. Like there's other hacker groups trying to find out identities or trying to hack us. Towards the kind of like the end of the group, we're so popular that we weren't even doing the hacking ourselves anymore. We were just receiving hacks from other hackers to publish. So we kind of almost became the new WikiLeaks. We received a leak from this guy called Jeremy Hammond. He hacked into the Arizona police. He hacked into some police officer and he gave us all his emails. And those emails had a lot of interesting information. But he also gave us a press release to release with that email dump. And I didn't really read the press release, but part of the press release had like a statement to say less off the pigs, and that means like less kill police officers. And I didn't really read that, I just published it. But then that kind of like, I didn't want to publish that, because that kind of like crossed the line for me, because I didn't want to incite violence. And that's when I kind of thought about leaving. After I finished my A-levels, I became more and more interested in decentralized systems and peer-to-peer networks like Bitcoin, because I think I learned how powerful the internet was at the time. I learned that information is a very powerful tool that could democratize power or distribute power among people. And so I did an undergraduate degree in computer science, but I also did a PhD in computer science in cryptocurrencies, scaling cryptocurrency technology. And that was kind of spun out into a company with the other people in my research team called Chainspace. And that team was later acquired by Facebook. But I didn't end up joining Facebook. I created a different project, which is what I've been involved with for the past 5 years. It's called Celestia, which is kind of like a system that allows you to create decentralized applications in a scalable way. that is censorship resistant. When we were active in 2011, 2010, there wasn't really that much of a nation-state aspect of hacking. Like, hacking was mostly done by random people on the internet for fun or for money. Like, no one heard about like China doing hacks or the US government doing hacks. Since then, a lot of more APTs have been discovered that originated from kind of government hacking groups. A lot of them are in China, Russia. The governments can often be a lot more effective than normal hackers because they have access to vulnerabilities that no one else would. So, for example, on the internet, there's this marketplace for vulnerabilities. The going rate for a exploit to hacking someone's iPhone is like $1 million, for example. You can go and sell that to $1 million to a exploit broker that will probably go and sell that exploit to a government, and that government could use them to hack people. In many cases, they end up in governments that try to hack activists, for example. I would definitely say that security today is better and more advanced than security, 14 years ago, 15 years ago. Like, a lot of the basic vulnerabilities that we saw, back then, that websites were vulnerable to, are no longer existing or no longer the case. So, like, as a programmer, programmers find it a lot easier now to create secure software, but there's still like a lot of security issues. Like, for people, the biggest security problem tends to be people using the same password everywhere. If some insecure website gets hacked, then your passwords, an account, and all the other websites will also get hacked. But now we obviously have things like two-factor authentication. But I would say what's not changed is social engineering and phishing. Like, phishing attacks are still very successful today and very prevalent today. So, like, if you send 2,000 phishing emails to 2,000 employees, like, you're almost certain that at least one of those employees will fall for that. In terms of what's next for Anonymous, there's definitely been a few attacks here and there over the past decade, but we'll have to see if there's ever going to be like some massive resurgence or something that causes a massive reignition of Anonymous. The Anonymous of the 2010s or the 2000s was kind of like much bigger and much stronger than I would say it exists today. At its peak, there were something like 7,000 people in the chat rooms, and now it's like way less, maybe 100 or so, if you go back to the same chat room. I think what caused the decline in numbers was after 2011, when Sabu was revealed to be a FBI informant. That caused a huge loss of trust within the group because he was like one of the most active people in the group during that year. So it was like the most active person turned out to be an FBI informant. It was basically like game over at that point. It's like, who can you trust? I think there's a lot of smaller groups in various countries around the world. Like, as I mentioned, for example, in Ukraine, there's like a Ukraine local hacking group that tries to hack Russian targets, and in Russia there's something similar. And there's like people have tried to create a lot of local groups around the world. So like LulzSec, there's a lot of like LulzSec copycats. It's nothing to do with us. It's just like different random people who have decided to copy that and create a local version of the group. Yeah, that's a reflection of Anonymous, or the idea of Anonymous. It's basically a meme. Like, you can copy and paste the idea and create your own version of it.
Hi, I'm a producer on Authorized account. If you enjoyed this video, then please subscribe and comment with more topics that you'd like us to cover in this series.